about how to turn bad news into good news, because all of us have difficult planetary angles in our charts, and many of us that have difficult planetary angles with the transits in our charts. And so the first thing I'm going to do is talk about our own individual charts, how to deal with the difficult angles, and how to deal with the transits. And then at the end, I'm going to pass out some papers, some little worksheets on how to turn bad news into good news also. But first of all, I think the most difficult planetary aspects are the square. That's the hardest, I believe. The opposition, the semi-square, the sesquiquadrate, which is 135 degrees, and the conjunction. And the reason these are difficult is because if you have one planet, all of you are, I assume, familiar with planets and aspects. I don't know if you describe that. So if you have one planet, for example, Mars, and it's making a square angle with your sun, then it's like going down a road and running through a stop sign, except the stop sign isn't up, so then you get slammed with a 45-degree angle. And the key is to learn how to slow down, know where those stop signs are, so you can slow down and negotiate and decide who's going to go first. But it usually catches you out of the blue. The oppositions are a little bit easier because it's like I'm going to be sitting here and I'm talking to you and we're opposing each other. The bad news is we can see all of our faults, but the good news is we can also see our good points. And so it's difficult because there's a tug of war, but on the other hand, there's a balancing. So those are easy. You can usually see pretty clearly. The semi-square usually has something to do with your own concept about something. It's something that you taught. It has to do with cognitive thinking. And if you have a semi-square in your chart, and perhaps it could be between Saturn and Venus, for example. So you might think that maybe you're not okay or that you won't have your financial security needs met or that sort of thing, but it has to do with the way you internalize or decipher things. And the remedy for that is to talk to someone who's very successful in what you're worried about and ask them how they think or ask for a different point of view. When you have a sesquisquare or a sesquiquadrate, that's the angle. It looks like a square with a little tail on the bottom of it. It's 135 degree. I call that the no-see-em aspect. And it's coming from outside of you. It's like going to the beach and if you're having a picnic and you get bitten by a mosquito, you can usually kill the mosquito and get some type of revenge for that. But the little no-see-ems that bite you all the time and they just like really are irritating, these little sesquisquares are about that. It's about having these little outside irritants that are always bothering you. And it's, the best thing to do is try to ignore it. If you have 3 or more sesquiquares in a chart, sometimes you're more prone to being an alcoholic. So I think people just kind of numb themselves with that. So you have to learn how to let it brush off and how not to take that seriously, and learn how not to obsess on it. The conjunction is a difficult aspect, but it's one of the easier ones to deal with, I believe, because you can integrate whatever the planets are. You can put them together. It's like making a stew, and you can put them together and work with them a lot easier. So when I first got interested in astrology, I wanted to know what made someone successful. And my definition of success was, well, it didn't have to be wealth or fame, but what made life meaningful for a person, or what made a person be able to rise to the top, or what made a person be able to choose what they want and go for it. And most of the real successful people I knew had very difficult charts. And it really boils down to attitude. If you have a proactive attitude, you're going to be more successful than if you have a cynical, passive attitude. The first Saturn return we have, prior to the first Saturn return, the outside world has more control over us than we do because of our age and experience level. The year we have our Saturn return, in our late 20s, is a year we really need to make a decision on whether we're going to be proactive, be responsible, Saturn, responsible for our actions, or blame all of our problems on astrology or the next door neighbor, or whether we're black or white or fat or skinny or whatever. And The decisions we make from an attitudinal standpoint in our late 20s has a whole lot to do with where we end up in our late 50s when we have our second Saturn return. And you use between the first and second Saturn return to pretty much make your way in the world, and you make your fortune, or you lose it, or you make it again, or you get married, or you get divorced, or you have kids, or you don't. But this is a time where it's your life, and you're establishing self, and you're improving yourself, and you're learning. When you have your second Saturn return in your late 50s, you're usually at a point where everything that you've done right, or even the choices that you made that failed, but you made a choice and you took responsibility for that, then you were able to turn it around, learn from it, gain some wisdom from it. You're probably going to be okay, because you can be glad of your experiences. It makes you wiser. But when you think about older people, and I think, I don't think 60's old anymore. We're living a lot longer now and a lot healthier. So I think it's just a new chapter in our lives. But you think about older people as either very wise because of their attitude, or you think of them as old fuddy-duddies. And they say the older you get, the more so you get. So the second Saturn return is another chance to be able to change your attitudes, or if you already have a proactive attitude, say, wow, I've got a proactive attitude. This is my life. These are my situations. This is what I want my life to really be. This is where I want to be of service. The only thing you don't have to do after your second Saturn return is prove yourself, because you've already done that. So your motives for doing something after the second Saturn return are somewhat different. But when I look at attitudes, I want to tell you about one of the first charts I did when I became a professional astrologer, and it was for a woman who was a parole officer. And she wanted me to do a chart for a woman who was a murderer, and she was getting out of jail. They didn't know what to do with her. And I've never met a murderer before. And this woman was one of the meanest, scariest looking women I'd ever seen. She was about 6'2". She had a big scar on her face. She was mean. And I looked at her chart, and she had a whole lot of really heavy-duty planets in her 12th house, and there were squares with Pluto and Saturn and Mars, and it was just really heavy-duty. And I told this parole officer I would do this woman's chart if she sat with us, because I didn't want to be alone. But when I talked to her, I said, you know, she was raised in a ghetto, and she had been abused her whole life, and she'd been sexually abused, she'd been beaten up, and what she did is the man she was engaged to abused her, and she shot him with a shotgun. And I said, you know, if I were in your situation, I think I would have done the same thing, because you didn't know you had any options, and you just had enough of it, and so you just exploded. But of course, that wasn't the right option to take. That there were other opportunities if you knew about it. And this woman was smart, and she had a lot of compassion, believe it or not. And I asked the parole officer, I said, is there any way? And I said to this lady, I said, if you would be interested, maybe we could find a way for you to go to college and learn to be a psychologist, because for you have a perfect chart to be a psychologist, and you could really help these people in the prison more than I can, because they're going to listen to you. You've been here, and in fact, I mean, she was so mean looking, you would listen to her. And she said, she was interested. And about 2 years later, I was walking down the street, and I heard somebody call my name, and it was this woman, and she said, I'm going to college. And I said, wow, that's great. About 10 years later, I had a client come to my office, and he was a district attorney. He said, hey, we have a mutual friend. And I said, who's that? And he named this woman's name, and he said, she's a psychologist in our penal system, and she has fewer returns than anyone we've ever had in the history of the world. Isn't that amazing? So it has to do with taking the worst scenario and turning it in. She could understand how criminals felt. She understood how they thought. She was able to make an impact in their lives. And so for all of us, when we have these difficult aspects, we can learn something from it. So the first aspect I want to talk about is Pluto, because Pluto works on the unconscious level a lot, and I call it the big rotor-rooter planet of the zodiac. It comes in, and when you get it by a transit, it just seems to pull up everything that you've suppressed your whole life. and I just finished having a Pluto transit, and I came out all right with it, but I did make an appointment with a psychologist thinking, I think I must need you. But then I didn't know what to say to him, so I didn't go anymore. But I know there's something in there that's going to come up and blindside me sooner or later. But anyway, when you're born with Pluto making a difficult angle with the sun, it means that your father, or if you have a hard angle with the moon, it means that your mother was going through a death at a particular time in your life. And the way you figure out the time is the orb of the aspect. So if the sun is square Pluto with a 3-degree orb, that means when you were 3 years old, your father was going through a death of some sort. And it could have been a real death, like the death of a parent or death of a friend, or it could have been a symbolic death, like a death of a career or a death of a dream. But you know how when somebody dies, how you try to will them to stay alive, but you really have no control over it, so you have to let go. Do I hold on? Do I let go? Do I hold on? Do I let go? That's how you feel your entire life when you have a Pluto square. If it's a Pluto square with the sun, it's usually on a very personal, ego type level. If you have it with the moon, it's more on an emotional, receptive level. You feel like you need to be in emotional control. And so when I look at charts, all of us have a possibility, but not all of us have the probability of reaching our potential. People with Pluto squares usually have the probability of reaching their potential because it's this life or death type urgency. They feel like they might not even know what they're feeling. They feel like they have to live their life because life is short. It can be taken away from you. So they want to live their life rather than survive their life. And this makes a big difference. Now, Pluto does 3 things. It's all about control. It either makes you feel with these squares. Now, with a square opposition, these difficult angles, it usually shows there's either too much of something or not enough of something. So our job is to learn how to channel that energy into something that's going to be productive for us. So when you have the Pluto squaring the sun or the moon, you want to be in control. But sometimes that need to be in control ends up controlling you. And the 3 ways Pluto controls is either you feel like you're being run over by a steamroller and everybody else is controlling you, or you overcompensate for that and you try to control everybody else and you become this obnoxious control freak. Or you can use Pluto in the best way, and that's to really claim your own power and choose to work with people who are going to empower you and you can empower them. And these people with the moon or the sun square Pluto often are very good at helping the underdog, and they can go out and help all the starving people in Africa. However, sometimes the people they can't help them because they don't have the resources to do that. And these people also get along very well with people who are very successful and who believe in abundance and who use their power constructively because they're not going to be jealous of the person's power. The people they're going to have the hardest time with are the kind of middle of the road people who get jealous of their magnetism. The people that have these Plutos squaring the sun or moon are very magnetic, and they have to really be careful what they wish for. I mean, they're just like the walking example of The Secret or what is it, the law of abundance. Because whatever you dwell on is what you'll bring to you. So if they're thinking about all the things they hate and don't like, they're going to bring more of that. And that's going to put them on a defensiveness. And anytime they're on a defensiveness, in a defensive situation, they're going to be operating at a disadvantage because they're defending their position rather than going forward. And so it's really important for Pluto square people to really know, or Pluto difficult angle people, to really know how to use this power constructively, and then roll about what they want to manifest in their life, and they're like a magnet. They bring it to it. It's just an amazing, amazing planetary angle when it's used in a positive way, but it's a real difficult one otherwise. Yes?
When you were naming the hard angles, you did not include the quincunx. Do you not consider that to be a hard angle?
You know, I don't. The quincunx, that's a good question, though. The quincunx is the 150-degree angle, and that means there needs to be an adjustment. And it's like looking out of your peripheral vision. You have to kind of turn and look a little sideways a little bit to be able to see it. So making an adjustment can be difficult, but maybe because I'm a Gemini, I'm making adjustments all the time. Yeah, I didn't think of that. It's been difficult. But it is, you have to look at it from another point of view. It's like going to France and not speaking French. Well, you can still enjoy it, but if you spoke French, you'd enjoy it a lot more. And if you don't make these adjustments, it becomes a health aspect. So it's really important to look at your quincunx. And I actually give a 3-degree orb with the quincunx, because I know most people, I think, give a 2-degree orb, but I stretch it a little bit more, maybe even 4 degrees, because I think it is a very powerful aspect.
Could a square just be sine, or is it worse by degree?
I do it by degree. I use a 10-degree orb with the sun and the moon, and a 6-degree orb with the others.
So if it's not within that degree, they're square by sine, but you're not feeling it?
Oh, I think you will. I think you'll feel it. But it's not going to be the major thing in your life. You're going to have something else that's going to overpower that. I think when you have 2 different signs, it means you might have an earthy way of dealing with something, or you might have a emotional, watery way of dealing with something, and that can cause a conflict, maybe, to me, it's kind of minor when the orbs are really wide, because most of us have closer orbs, and we're so busy trying to deal with where we're just getting really knocked in the head.
With the fire on that.
Yeah, that we kind of focus on that. Yeah.
When you mentioned the orb, you can tell when an event happened by looking at the degrees.
Yes.
Is that approaching? And what happens if the aspect is separating? Would that have been something before birth?
Well, it can be both, but it's also, even if it's separating, it can be when you were 3 years old or 4 years old, or it can mean when one of your parents, like if it's a square to the sun, when something happened to your dad when he was 4 years old. It could be like that too. Now, the difference between the approaching and the approaching ones are stronger in intensity than the separating ones. The separating ones are much easier to deal with, because you've already gone through the hard thing, and now the difficulty seems to be releasing rather than getting closer and closer until you get whammed, and then it has to release. When Pluto makes a difficult angle with Mercury has to do with communication. And these people are really usually very, very strong in their opinions, but it shows that they were raised in a family where the opinions were already made before they ever got to the discussion table. So what they had to do is learn how to know what somebody was going to say before they say it, just so they could get a word in edgewise. Now, the good news about that, it makes these people psychic in a way. It makes them know what you're going to say. But if you tell somebody what you're going to say before you say it, usually ticks them off, and then they don't want to listen to you. And it means that sometimes people control by not listening. That was the power thing in the dynamics of the family. Now, I have an adopted son who has his Pluto conjunct Mercury. And he was born in a Vietnam orphanage. And the one thing, I got to meet the woman who ran the orphanage, and she said one characteristic about these Vietnamese children were they were all going to be stubborn. because only the defiant kids could last in this orphanage. All the others would die. And so she said, be sure to teach him ethics and principles when he's little, because when he's big, he's going to have his mind really made up. That was the best advice I could have ever had. And he was born with that Mercury-Pluto angle, and he is probably the most bullheaded person I've ever met in my life. But it helped him survive. He's learned how to use it in a way. He's only, when he was 30 years old, he was made senior vice president of a whole banking system. I mean, he's brilliant and he's kind. And so he's able, but to reason with him, it's very difficult to do. Only if he wants you to reason with him, and then he has the upper hand. But the thing to learn with the Pluto making a hard angle with Mercury is how to listen. Because if you listen to someone, even if you know what they're going to say, if you listen to them, paraphrase it back to them so they know you've heard them, and then give your opinion, learn that kind of diplomacy, then your ability to be a communicator is phenomenal. And people can talk before large groups of people, and they can sway people, and they're able to look at what's underneath the surface. And but with these people, sometimes they can control by having their mind made up, and they can be very, very narrow-minded. So the idea is to learn where in your own chart where you might run into a trap, because persistence is good if you know when to stop, and that Mercury-Pluto is very, very persistent. And then the other is when you're working and interacting with people, to know maybe whether they have this kind of planetary angle where their mind's made up and they don't want to hear you. And so with them, you have to be quiet, say, let me listen to what you say, and then let them know you've heard it, so they have that validation, and then give your opinion. When Pluto makes a hard angle with Venus, Venus rules two things. It rules love, and it rules security, love and money. They seem to go together. I think that's why inheritances are just so difficult for some people when somebody doesn't get the right teapot or something, and they squabble over $100 here or $200 there. It's because maybe they didn't feel validated enough. They didn't feel loved enough, so they want that trinket to give them that kind of validation. But when Pluto makes a hard angle with Venus, it usually means that somewhere in your life, love was mixed up with control. And so it's important to learn how to be able to give and receive love and feel love from a very powerful standpoint, but not be obsessive and controlling with love. Those are some of the big lessons you have to learn. Love is synonymous with manipulation when you have this aspect. And when you grow up, you can learn how to use this in a very positive, where you can have a passionate love rather than a controlling love. It's that thing about holding on to the bird and letting it go, and it flies back to you. But with the squares in the opposition, if it doesn't come back, you'll go out and kill it. But it also has to do with money and the control of money, and how and some people. There was a psychiatrist who was a good friend of mine. He said, "Oh, I don't believe in astrology, Kitty, but tell me about this man." And he gave me his birth information, and this man he was a Taurus. I think he was a double Taurus, and he had a Pluto square Venus, and he had a whole lot of stuff that had to do around security and money. And I said how important financial security was to this man. And the psychiatrist said, well, you know, you nailed him with everything except the financing part. And he said, this man is very, very wealthy, and he lives like a pauper. And I thought, well, who else would choose to live like a pauper then, unless money was an issue? So, you know, that happens sometimes. And so it's important to understand that within your own chart, and even when you have a transit of Pluto making an angle with Venus, it's a time when you often reevaluate your relationships, or you want to feel like there's some passion in the relationship, that you're just not being the housekeeper, or you know, you want something where you really feel that. That Pluto has to do with that intensity of life and death. Pluto making a hard angle with Mars is very difficult because Mars is a planet of action, and it's the god of war, and Pluto is the god of the underworld, and these two tangle with each other, and you have nuclear energy type power. It's the kind that blows up rocket ships and things. So with these people, it's about anger and about turning that anger into rage. And when I talk about Mars, Mars is a planet of assertive action. And when that action gets blocked, it turns into anger. And if that anger gets intensified, it turns into rage. And when you get Pluto and Mars together, you have that very volatile combination. So it's real important to learn how to use this in a positive way. And many people that are like make rockets or are in the nuclear energy field, they'll have this aspect because it's powerful. And it's real important for these people to have a good, positive way to release that tension. And it's really important that they have an environment in which they can use a tremendous amount of energy to be able to see the results of what they've done. And one of my clients in California owns a steel company, and one of the things he would make were those steel cages that the rockets are in before they shoot off, and he builds those things. That's a perfect career for somebody with Mars Pluto squaring. And his wife wanted some new lighting in her kitchen. Well, most people would just go out to Home Depot and get a little light thing and put up. He tore down the whole kitchen, put like 52 lights in there, really told them off. I mean, who in the world would do that? Except somebody with this excess energy that needed. So it's much better than beating her. I mean, he fixed her kitchen. That's true. Pluto, Uranus, the people like Kelly, who were born with Pluto conjunct Uranus, people born in the middle 60s, are an amazing group of people. They say that some people say that these are the people that reincarnated from Atlantis, and they're either going to blow up our world or they're going to save it. It's so intense, so bigger than life, and so it's about taking the high technology, the transformation. Pluto's about transformation. Think about how our life is now compared to how it was before the internet. It's my son who has Pluto conjunct Uranus. I told people at dinner tonight, this son has Pluto conjunct Uranus conjunct his sun conjunct his ascending sign. And when he was little, he wanted to be master of all time, space, and dimension. That's that kind of energy. And he did invent the first digital broadcasting system in the world in his 30s.
Wow.
So it's just like it's using this kind of energy in a high-tech way. And when he was a kid, he used to build rockets and these little bombs that blew up around our yard all the time. But they made a lot of noise. That's what this is about. You can't have a quiet one with that in the first house. Just ask Kelly. You can be quiet. Like this.
If you can be quiet.
You're lucky to find the camera.
And Pluto and Uranus Pluto and Neptune is about people with good angles with Pluto and Neptune is about having a consciousness about the world and the transformation from a very spiritual standpoint, about understanding that the thoughts we have here or the things we do to conserve our energy here is going to have something to do with the peace or the things that happen in other parts of the world. It's a kind of a global understanding. The people that have difficult angles with this might not really care much about that consciousness.
But doesn't everyone alive pretty much have Pluto sextile Neptune?
Well, I don't think some of the people do. I don't think
I thought that was a 100-year sextile.
Well, I'm trying to think. I don't think my parents did.
Yeah,
But-
no, not everybody. I mean, a certain span
Yeah.
of people. But it's,
I don't know. That's a good question. That's a real good question. I'll have to look at that. I
Yeah,
haven't-
basically from like 1930 to
Baby
2030.
boomers had it.
All right, so that's what my parents didn't have.
Yeah, because they were born before 1930.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like a 100-year sextile now because
So it's that kind of that understanding that gives us hope that perhaps our world is going to find peace after all.
You skip Saturn and Jupiter. Pluto.
I skipped Saturn. Oh, Pluto, Saturn.
And South Node.
Pluto, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter. I don't really look at Jupiter being a real bad planetary angle because it just means there's a whole lot of something. And so Jupiter just means you really have to budget your time or budget your money or not overdo on something because there's a tendency just to have too much buckets of stuff coming when you have a Jupiter square. So I'm not going to focus too much on Jupiter, but Pluto and Saturn is a big one. People that are born with Pluto making a hard angle with Saturn, they're kind of born feeling like they're at the bottom of a well and there's nobody there to help them out. And you either die at the bottom of the well or you pull yourself out with your own bootstraps. And if you pull yourself out with your own bootstraps, you're going to have a wisdom that you can take with you your entire life. Because Pluto is about power you have no control over and transformation. And in order to transform, you have to let go of something. And Saturn has to do with fear. So you put those two together, and it's pretty intense. But the people that have been able to learn to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and get that inner self-worth that no one can give to you. I remember my mom telling me, I forget now the philosopher's name, but he was in a concentration camp, and he said that people can take away your money, they can take away parts of your body, they can take away your family, but they can't take away your soul. That's part of you, that inner integrity, that the ethics you stand for, that inner self-worth is really, really important to have anyway, but especially if you have a Saturn-Pluto difficult angle in your chart. And then if you grow from that and you learn from it, you become self-substantial because of that. You become such a better healer. Pluto is about healing. And I remember my daughter going through a real traumatic time. Well, first of all, I remember going to a psychologist when I was going to get divorced. And she was this kind of like a druid type, hippie type girl that was real sweet and really nice. And she helped me a lot. But when my daughter had this horrible thing happen to her, I needed somebody to talk to, but I didn't want this little airy-fairy person. I needed somebody that knew what anger and rage was. And so I went to a woman that I didn't do her chart, but I would almost guarantee you she had some Pluto-Saturn stuff going on in her chart. And she was a tremendous help because she had that wisdom, that fortitude that I knew could help me through this time, and she did. Pluto and, see, this is why I wrote my notes, because I always forget these planets. Then I forget to look at my notes. Pluto, Saturn, the Pluto squaring itself. Pluto squaring itself is the time, since Pluto has to do with control, it teaches us how, it's what we use to manipulate. When we have a Pluto square, our manipulations usually backfire on us. And so we have to really look at better ways of dealing with something. And sometimes when our manipulations backfire, we feel we have no power because we've relied on our manipulations to get what we want. All of a sudden, they don't work anymore, and then we think, oh my gosh, we have no control. So it's really important to learn how to get what you want without manipulating. And again, it's about empowerment.
You don't get that by transit, though.
You get that by transit, yeah, when you get the transit. And sometimes if you're doing directions in your chart, you can get like a semi-square. Yes.
Do you do anything with the nodes? Node?
Yeah, I can, but the way I look at nodes, not necessarily from a personal standpoint, but to me, the nodes have to do with, they're very personal in a way that you have to have a nodal angle with a transit in order to be born, in order to die, in order to get married, in order to get divorced, in order to have a baby, in order to move. It always takes, the node is always involved in that. It's always involved in major things that happen in your life. the either a transit making an aspect with your node, or the node, the transit node making an aspect with one of your planets. The north node talks about what you're supposed to be going towards in this lifetime to manifest your life. And the south node has to do with talents you were born with, but areas in your life in which you might get stuck because you rely on old ways of doing things. And so you need to learn how to move from the old way of doing things, keep those talents and abilities, but apply them to the new way of doing things. And so,
Well, that's helpful, thank you. I'm fishing here a little bit from myself. It's very hard to read your own chart, so.
oh, so it's something you had.
No, well, I have
Pluto
Pluto conjunct South Node in the 12th house, in Leo.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, squaring Venus and, you know.
All right, so
in
that's
the-
a lot of old past life stuff.
Right, right. and
That
I
is
have
definitely on an
really-
unconscious level, since
Right.
Pluto's unconscious, the South Node's past, and the 12th house is unconscious, so that's like really deep stuff. But it's about power.
Okay.
It's about using your power, not by controlling other people, and not being controlled by other people, but
Not
to
being
use that
controlled by
power in service to others. Go towards that north node and be in service to others. And what is your Pluto in?
Leo.
Leo. So then the north node is in Aquarius, which is working with groups or organizations and being of service. So the way you can use that then is to be a healer. It's to be an energy healer. That's a wonderful way to use that.
Oh,
But
thank you.
what
I'm
you have to do-
hoping that I'm growing toward.
Well, good. The thing you have to know, though, about being an energy healer with Pluto is Pluto and Uranus make really good energy healers. But if you have difficult angles with Pluto, you have to, if you have to be in control of yourself, because you can cure a headache energetically, but if you're angry, you can give somebody a headache, and so you have to really know how to control your equilibrium when you have that. But anybody that has a Pluto square or opposition or any hard angle, or as well as a good angle, if somebody's sick and you just put your hand on them, they're going to feel better because of that. And so it's one of the, and with your chart, I think you would make a wonderful healer for that Pluto.
Well, thank you for that information. I appreciate it.
All right, so Neptune. Neptune is a planet that has to do with ideals, inspiration, creativity, spirituality, everything that's not tangible. Trying to understand Neptune is like trying to grab hold of a handful of water. But it makes a difficult angle with the sun or the moon. Then it means that you dealt with a lot of confusion when you were growing up. It was the sun. It means whatever you heard about your dad was probably not true. And if it was a square with your moon, whatever you heard about your mom probably wasn't true either. It's an aspect that you find in a lot of people who were raised with parents who had alcohol problems, alcohol or drug problems, or if they were teetotalers, then maybe they were religious fanatics, or perhaps even if they had none of those symptoms, it was as if they had alcoholic type personalities. And what I mean by that is when you walk in the door and you might be singing a song and your parent is just fine, and they say, what a beautiful song. You walk in the door the next day and they just had too many drinks or too many drugs or something, and they chew you out because you sang the song. That kind of discombobulation, that kind of confusion is really hard on a person because it makes you not sure who you are. And
You don't know how to act. You don't know how to
and you don't know
act.
how to act either. And what happens then psychically, you start thinking now, what is it going to feel like when I walk in the house so I can adjust to it before you even get in the door? So it makes you really, really, really psychic. But on the other hand, it doesn't teach you anything about boundaries. And so I think when people have Neptune squaring or making a hard angle with their sun or their moon, somewhere in their early childhood they were spiritually abused. And it's like they can be beautiful on the outside, the family can look wonderful from the outside, but inside is totally different. You're getting a whole different. So the person doesn't get the validation they need. Like if somebody hit you over the head with a 2x4 and you had a big knot in your head, somebody would say, "Oh my gosh, you have this knot in your head. Let me take you to the doctor and let me give you a bandage and make you chicken soup." But if your soul's been abused, nobody sees that. And so you go around feeling all black and blue inside, and it's a very difficult aspect. People born with a Neptune making a heart angle with their sun or moon are born with the heart of a poet. And they know how the world could be. And they're disappointed because the world isn't like that. But if they realize they were born to inspire or to be what the world could be and inspire others, then they can help the whole earth go up to another notch just because of their idealism. But it's also important not to be so idealistic that you end up getting a little disappointed. You have to also be realistic when you have Neptune. Neptune squares also show that you were taught to be in denial because that's how you learn to cope. You learn to cope by leaving your body. The sun has to do with your ego, and this is who I am, but Neptune is like a bucket of water that's pouring on top of you, and you don't know who you are. So it's important to learn how to understand who you are as an individual, but how you relate with everyone else, and how to say no, and how to have a good, healthy, strong boundary, and how to, when it's important to allow yourself to be psychically open, and when it's important to close the door. A good psychic friend of mine said before she does a reading for someone, she imagines turning the light switch on, and then she's open and she channels all this information. And then when she's finished, she imagines turning the light switch off. She said if I went to Kmart with my light switch on, I'd over-circuit. So this is how she makes that distinction. And also, it's important to learn the golden and the silver rule. The golden rule, of course, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The silver rule is don't let anybody do unto you anything you wouldn't do to them. And that's what you almost have to have tattooed on your hand so you can remember it. But if you do that, then you don't feel guilty, because this is also one of the planetary angles that show guilt. When Neptune makes an angle with Mercury, a difficult angle with Mercury, it means that communication sometimes is confusing. And people say one thing, but they mean something else. Now, one of my clients was a fiction writer. And the first time I did her chart, I said, you got so many mixed messages when you wrote it. She said, no, I didn't. I said, but your chart says you did. And she said, no, I had the most honest family. Well, she learned later that she found some stuff in the skeletons in the closet and had no idea all this stuff was going on. But she's a really good fiction writer, too, because this is one of the best planetary angles for that. It gives you that imagination. So it's important for anyone that has Mercury making a hard angle with Neptune to read the fine print and be real clear on what you're able to say, and also have some type of creative outlet like poetry or something like that to be able to express your ideas. Many film writers, for example, would have this because Neptune represents the film industry. Neptune making a hard angle with Venus is about love is synonymous with sacrifice and confusion. And sacrifice is good. Let's say if you and I are going to go to a movie and you break your leg and I stay home with you and I bring you some cherry pie and you sit there and watch TV instead of going to the movie, that kind of sacrifice is okay. That's reasonable. But if you and I were married and you just never wanted me to go to a movie at all because you didn't like movies and I sacrificed for that, or you were acting like a passive wuss and you wanted me to come take care of you and there's really nothing wrong with you, but you took up all my time. If I sacrificed for you for that and you didn't appreciate it, then I sacrificed for nothing. And if you did appreciate it, then you would owe me. And if you owed me, then you would resent me because you owed me. So the end result of a negative sacrifice is always resentment or guilt. Always. So that's a big no-no. Anybody that has Venus squaring or opposing Neptune has to learn what is a fair and reasonable sacrifice and what isn't, and how not to be manipulated by guilt. Now, people that are manipulated are also very good manipulators, so you also have to not use that technique yourself either, because it kind of backfires on you. Neptune making a hard angle with Mars. Mars is this planet of assertive action. It's fire. Neptune is water. When you put these two together, it's like throwing a firecracker into an aquarium. You get a big poop of steam, and you wonder, what in the heck are you? Where am I going? You're in a fog. But the fog can be turned into a steam engine. And the tools that are needed to turn the fog into a steam engine, or the steam into a steam engine, is inspiration, creativity, spirituality. People that are born with a difficult angle with Mars and Neptune often live in a situation where they have to deal with passive-aggressive people, or maybe they're passive-aggressive, because Mars is an assertive planet, and if it gets blocked, it gets angry. But if you're not allowed to get angry, then what do you do with it? So it kind of fizzles, and you become passive aggressive that way, and you get even with a smile on your face, or you are around people who are passive aggressive, and I think I would much rather somebody just confront me so I know what they're dealing with than somebody who's really angry, but they say, oh no, everything's fine, and then they come in and usurp something from me, and I don't know what that is. So it's really important when you have that Neptune Mars to be able to put that energy into something that's creative and inspired. It's one of the most creative aspects in the world. It's very, very good for dancing. Many choreographers will have this aspect in their chart. And if you're able to use that in this kind of creative way, then it helps give you confidence. It gives you physical energy. People with Neptune making a hard angle with their Sun, Moon, or Mars, especially the Sun and Mars, since both of those are real active energies, sometimes they feel washed out and they don't have any energy, and they just want to sit and vegetate and think about things rather than do them. That's the negative side of this. But if they can think about what inspires them or what's creative, then they get the physical energy back, and they're able to go forward and do some pretty amazing things. Neptune making a hard angle with Jupiter, you just have to really understand about honesty, because Jupiter is very expansive. Neptune has no boundaries. It's very, very creative. A lot of creative people have this in their chart, but it's also very important to learn how to have boundaries, because otherwise you can get overloaded sometimes with your imagination, or spending too much money, or trusting the wrong people, or wherever this falls in your chart. Neptune making a hard angle with Saturn is really difficult. Saturn has to do with fear, and Neptune has to do with creativity. And when these two make a hard angle with each other, a lot of people are very depressed. This is a depressing aspect, because somewhere they're taught that if you dream something, you're going to be disappointed, so don't dream it. And so, but Neptune wants to dream. And so what one has to learn is how to take a dream and put it into a practical application. Saturn's always about figuring out how to apply it and how to create structure to it. So people with a good angle between Saturn and Neptune know how to make order out of chaos. People with a bad angle with Saturn and Neptune often make chaos out of order. Yes?
What do you consider a bad aspect?
A bad aspect.
For instance, I have Sun with Saturn on one side and Neptune on the other.
So they're opposite. If Saturn and Neptune are opposite each other, if they're
outside of the square. So that's what you're.
Yeah. So a square, an opposition, a semi-square, a sesquiquadrate, and a conjunction are all difficult aspects.
And the conjunction. I'm sorry. Did you say conjunction?
Yes.
Oh,
But
I
the
see.
conjunction is also powerful, right?
It's very powerful. The conjunctions can be good or bad.
Positive and negative.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask, because
Yes.
I don't see the conjunction as necessarily.
Well, that's why I had it at the last of my list. I think of the least difficult to deal with. But what happens, the reason it's a difficult aspect is because you're dealing with different energies. You're dealing with Saturn, which Saturn rules the concrete block, and Neptune rules mist. I mean, how different can you get? And they're both real. But it's how do you blend those together?
I noticed that the year The Secret got huge, Neptune and Saturn were opposing in the sky. And what I've done with my clients ever since, whenever they have a Neptune and Saturn connection of any kind, it's okay, Neptune's I visualize, I imagine, Saturn's I crystallize, I make it real. And every time I check in, they're all great manifestors.
Yeah.
And you just take the Neptune and use the Saturn to crystallize the dream, that seems to work really well.
That's a really, really good way to say it, yes.
I have an example too. Is you said Mars conjunct Neptune. I have Jupiter and Mars conjunct Neptune. And I always have like 20 projects I'm working on. Creative projects. It's
Yeah.
like wow.
Yeah, because with the conjunction then, it's easier for you to take those dreams and bring them in and hone them in. It's when it's an opposition or a square, it's a little more difficult because you're having to look this way or that way and harness it in that way. Like if you're going straight, if you have a conjunction, it's like like Neptune is here and Saturn is here and you're walking together. That's a lot easier than if Neptune's over here and you're going here and you have to look over there and then you don't know where you're going, so it creates that conflict. But Neptune and Saturn, it's really important about having a healthy attitude when you have this aspect, because a lot of people control by being victims. They control by saying, "Oh, poor me," and they get a lot of attention that way, or they're soul suckers. And whew, my chart says I'm allergic to those people. It's just like being around ragweed or something. It makes my eyes water. So those clients I send to some other people. What happens with this, you have to be careful. I mean, you have a good right to be depressed maybe about something, but that's not the way to stay depressed. Isn't the way to solve a problem. I think it's really important if somebody's hurt or somebody dies, you need to grieve and you're going to be sad. But when you just hang on to it too long, then it's like a soap opera. And what Neptune does, it gives you this imagination, so you think, oh wow, I can't wait to think of the next catastrophe that's going to happen. and it's like living in your own soap opera. And maybe it's all right, but not for a lot of people. Not if you're going to be successful. It's not all right unless you write soap operas, and then you might as well. I think if you have those aspects, then capitalize on them that way.
But they really believe that soapbox.
But they do believe it, and it's really draining. And some people get really, really depressed. So if anybody gets depressed, here's my solution for getting depressed. You can't solve a problem. What Einstein said, you can't solve a problem from the position of the problem. You have to get away from it. I forget what that quote was, but it's what you want to do is, if you're really depressed about something, just jot it on a piece of paper, the thing you're depressed about, and then make yourself think about something that makes you happy. And for me, I think about riding a Pegasus over a beautiful landscape. I think that's just very cool. So I visualize myself on this beautiful Pegasus, and then I'm not sad anymore. And then once I'm not sad anymore, I look at what I was depressed about, and I solve the problem. I say, well, do I have any control over this? Do I just have to accept it? Can I leave? Can I go right or go left or do this? Or what's the remedy for this? And then take an action with it, and then I don't get depressed. The last time I got depressed, just for no reason, just being depressed, was about 12 years ago. I still remember this, and I was soaking in the bathtub, just really feeling sorry for myself. And my daughter had just come home from Guatemala, and she talked about this little girl who wanted to be in a singing program at school. She didn't have money to buy her little outfit, and she came dressed as a little Indian. Everybody made fun of her. And I was, thinking about how sorry I felt for myself, and then I knew it was some kind of a Neptune thing, but I was really milking it for all it's worth. And then I thought, well, Neptune wants to do something inspired. So I'd read that there was a sale at Kmart, and I jumped out of the bed. I got my daughter, I said, let's go to Kmart and buy all these clothes for this little girl. So we bought a whole basket full of clothes for $100. We bought enough clothes for the whole village, I think. We bought toys, we bought clothes for her, for her brothers, her sisters, for everyone. And then when my daughter went back to Guatemala, she took all these clothes with her. And I was happy buying the clothes. I was happy when my daughter left with a box. I was happy thinking about what they were looking at when they opened it. I've been happy ever since. So what you do, that $100 for these clothes versus $100 to a shrink. I mean, and so that's what you do with Neptune. You use your imagination, you inspire. That's where you go with it. Neptune making an angle with Uranus. Wow, with Uranus in Neptune sign now, and Neptune in Uranus' sign. I mean, what a creative time this is now, and inventive and creative. And I do believe in the next couple of years we're going to have an invention or something happens that changes our life as much as the internet changed our life. It's a very exciting kind of combination. Neptune and Pluto is about combining your spiritual beliefs with your cold hard reality beliefs of reality, and trying to blend them. It's important with Neptune to always have a vision or a dream, and then it's also important to be working towards that, but not get too hung up on the outcome, because it's a process about reaching that. Uranus is a planet that has to do with change and being on the leading edge of things. And when Uranus makes a hard angle with the sun or the moon, it means you were born ahead of your time. And you're supposed to be a catalyst for change. And it reminds me of an interview I heard once with Woody Allen. And somebody asked him, what would you do if space people came to Earth and they were 100 years ahead of our time? And he said, well, I would ignore them. They would be 100 years ahead of our time. They couldn't hurt me. They couldn't help me. He said, what would worry me is if space people came to Earth and they were only 5 minutes ahead of time. Then they would be first in line with the dinner reservations. So when I see a planet with Uranus squares or oppositions, I always say be 5 minutes ahead of time, because you're going to be the leader of the pack somewhere, and you can be a catalyst for change. That's what it's about. And usually these people never feel like they actually fit anywhere, but they're not supposed to fit anywhere. They're supposed to be, Uranus is about groups of people, but also the individual within the group of people. So yeah, you have a passport to the whole world of all the groups, but you just won't necessarily be part of the pack. You'll always be a visitor where you're going, and you'll always be a catalyst, and you have this charisma, and you can't go to Harvard and get a degree in charisma. You're either born with it or not. And Uranus squares and oppositions and conjunctions give you that. They give you that extra sparkle. When Uranus makes a hard angle with Mercury, it means your mind works kind of in sentence fragments. You're very, very intuitive. It's a very ingenious aspect. But instead of thinking from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you usually think from 1 to 14 to 6 to 28, and it bounces back and forth. And so therefore you combine Mercury, Uranus, and Saturn, put those together, and you have a really good combination for dyslexia, because you're going fast, you're going slow, and so it's easy to look at things backwards. One of my favorite charts I ever did was for a young boy. I did it for his parents. His parents were both teachers. Both of his parents were teachers at Stanford University. Had a smart brother, and he was about 6 years old. And the parents thought he was smart, but he didn't talk at 6 years old. He wasn't talking, and he was kind of in the slow group. He wasn't really retarded because he could do things, but he just wouldn't talk. So they had him in the slow group, and they wanted his chart done. And he had a lot of planets in the 12th house too, but but he was brilliant, actually. But he had some Jupiter squares. So here's where the Jupiter comes in too. He had so much to say, it was like trying to get ketchup out of a bottle. Nothing happened. I mean, and it would either come out as a blurb or nothing. And so I said, well, he's really brilliant, but there's just too much for him to communicate. So you need to give him art lessons or music lessons or something where he can express himself that way. And that kind of clogs it. It's like taking a ketchup bottle and just gently letting it flow out. And then he'll start to talk. So they gave him music lessons. And about 6 months later, they called me and said he was talking. A year later, they called me and they had him in the gifted program. And I thought, yay. And this is how astrology can really help. This kid could have gone his whole life thinking he was stupid when he just had too much to say. And sometimes drawing or writing poetry or music, that's one way to express that. Yes.
It seems like you're talking about a right brain, left brain emphasis. So is there anything in astrology that would accent either low hemisphere of the brain?
Well, Mercury, of course, has to do the way we think. And if aspects to Saturn gives us the ability to really think in the left analytical brain. So Mercury making a hard angle with Saturn, for example, makes a person very analytical and systematic in their thinking. And then Mercury with Uranus and Neptune, especially Neptune, definitely puts you in the right brain.
Not Venus?
Well, I think Venus could too. Venus, from an artistic standpoint, yes, it will put you. It will do that too. But it depends on the sign that Venus and Mercury. See, Venus and Mercury are always going to be kind of close together. They're not going to really be making a bad aspect of each other.
Did you happen to see any of this dominance in this child's chart? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I just remember having that Moon and Jupiter emphasizing those mental planets. And then the way to teach a child is through practical things. They can usually understand anything that they can use or build or touch. And if it's in an air sign, then they can think more analytically. And if it's in a water sign, they think more emotionally. And then you want to look to see like the moon aspects if it's in a water sign, or and see what's aspecting Mercury. But my financial planner is she has Mercury squaring Saturn, and she was Chinese and she was raised in Mississippi. But she happened to be smart. She got a scholarship to Stanford University, but when she went to Stanford, she spoke with a black Chinese Mississippi accent. That's for a Saturn square Mercury. But she graduated top of her chart. She's one of the top financial planners in this country now. She's very analytical and systematic, and that's how she used that. We're just getting right down to the hard work of thinking.
Mercury in the fire.
I skipped the fire. Well, that's usually about enthusiasm. So if you can get your student enthusiastic about anything, then they're going to want to learn it. But they can't stand boredom.
But unfortunately, they're all in a mixed bag at school.
They're all in a mixed bag.
So hard.
That is what's hard in that. But for those of you that have children, or those of you that are teachers, and even letting your little Gemini students go run an errand for you or something just to get them moving, and taking some of the Capricorn students and using the word serious maybe and respect for doing a good job. Sometimes just using those typical words that describe a sign helps the people learn in that way. Uranus making an angle with Venus. Venus is about love and money. And the reason, when Uranus makes a hard angle with Venus, it means that a person is really afraid they could get their rug pulled out from under them in a relationship. So with these people, it's really important that their relationship is based on friendship and value, not need or dependency. Because if you need somebody then that means you put all your eggs in their basket, they call the shots, you lose your independence and you resent it. If you think, oh, I want the security of a relationship, so you get somebody who needs you, they become a liability. There was a woman I did a chart for who did just that. And she had this husband, and I said, well, he's probably kind of like this bowling ball you're having to drag behind you all the time. and so the next day I got this phone call, and it was this man, he said, hello, Mrs. Hatcher. Well, I'm this bowling ball. Oh, man. So it's about having this friendship and having the independence. And from a financial standpoint, you want to be able to make enough money to buy you independence. You don't need money to be ostentatious or to prove you're better than somebody else, but you want money to buy you freedom. One of the fun things I do with my financial planner sometimes is she'll call and she'll say, she's talking with someone and she'll say, why does he need money? Or what does he want? And I'll say, what he really wants is if it's a Sagittarian thing, he wants to have money to be able to travel, or if it's a Taurus thing, he just wants to have it so he can look at it and touch it and know it's there. And so sometimes just knowing that helps give you that kind of security. Uranus making an angle with Mars. This can make somebody very impulsive and very rebellious. And so it's important that they're able to learn when to be able to take risks and when it's important to slow down just a little bit, because sometimes these are the people whose calendars are going faster than they are, and there's always some kind of an urgency attached to it. And so it's easy to break an ankle because you're doing 45 things as you're running down the street. Or right now I have Uranus is actually conjunct my Mars, and I was thinking, all right, how am I not going to attract anything? Because I was feeling very wired, and sure enough, a car ran a red light into me, but I didn't run into him. So, but it's still it's an accident aspect, but it's an aspect though that makes people want to take risks. So these kind of people need to have physical activity, and you have to have a way in which to direct that. And they like to be shocking sometimes, and they like to rock the boat, and you can do it in a way where you become rebellious, but on the other hand, you can also be a catalyst for the new inventive thing. So it's an idea about how to take your kind of personality or your kind of dynamics and focus it into something that's going to actually contribute to our society rather than break it apart. And then Uranus making an angle with Saturn, or with Jupiter. It's important to know the difference between the urgent and the important with this one, because things can be happening so fast you can't keep up with it. So the important things are going to be that which makes life meaningful for you, and the urgent things are the things where you feel like you're putting out fires all day and you don't know what you've accomplished. So the best thing to do if you're born with Uranus making a hard angle with Mars or with Jupiter is to have an idea of what you would like to accomplish by the end of the month, and then in order to do that, what you need to accomplish each week, and then each day, and only schedule your day for 4 hours instead of 8 hours, because the rest of your day is going to be taken up with these unpredictable things. And if you do that, then it keeps you from being out of balance. Uranus making a hard angle with Saturn. Of course, that was happening when we had our election. And it always means that it's time to take the old and combine it with the new, so we can go forward. Any companies, for example, that are too obsolete, they're going to die by the wayside. They're like old dinosaurs, and some of the people or the companies that are too far ahead, nobody can connect with them, and so they're just going to go out into space somewhere. But if you have a company, for example, or if you're a person that can combine the old with the new, or the traditional with the new and the innovative, then you're able to have your roots in the ground, but you're also able to go forward. And so it gives you that flexibility. People that are born with this, though, are often rebellious, but it says that freedom is in direct proportion to responsibility. If you have no freedom, it's horrible. But if you don't have any responsibility, you're going to create havoc. And this is one of the problems our world might have, because if we weren't responsible, for example, with our economy, with spending too much and buying too much and being irresponsible with our spending, and then we have to have the government bail us out, then that's fine, but the government's going to have a lot of control now because they own the money. They rule because of that. And so that's going to make some people rebellious. And so we're probably going to have a little bit of rebellion coming up. And the last time Pluto was in Capricorn, we had the Revolutionary War. So it's about learning how to be responsible. One thing I keep hearing Obama say is we need to be responsible. And it's not being negative. It's just like, hey, we need to be responsible so we don't keep getting ourselves in this mess. Yes?
Yeah, I used to think of that Saturn Uranus as Obama, Uranus, Saturn, McCain, but now that you're Uranus, Obama really embodies Uranus and Saturn all rolled together, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's kind of innovative, yet he's really responsible and traditional kind of at the same time.
And then even if McCain had won, it would be the first time we had a woman vice president. Who's more Uranian than Sarah Palin? Holy cow, she's like from another planet. So then McCain, that's Saturnian. So it was really an interesting. No matter who won, it showed that Uranus Saturn opposition. I thought it was great because of that. But it's sometimes fighting against authority. So it's hard sometimes for teenagers that have that Saturn-Uranus angle, because teenagers want all the privileges, but they don't want the responsibility yet, and so it's very awkward for them. But if you become part of the system, so you can change the system. That's what I tell people with this Saturn-Uranus. Uranus wants to change the system, but you have to have the credentials of Saturn to get in the position to make the impact to change it. So you have to combine the two. So I'm not going to say, I'm going to go to Saturn now. Saturn, making a hard angle with the Sun or Moon. That's a hard one because the Sun represents yourself, your ego. The Moon represents your mom, your emotions. Saturn represents fear. And looking at the orb between the two, it will show what age you were when your mom or your dad felt insecure, him or herself, or maybe they were away, or maybe they had a lot of fear in some way, or maybe for some reason they were detached, or maybe something happened to them when they were 2 or 3 years old, depending on what the orb is. And therefore, when you're that age, it triggers a response in them. This is really, I think, important looking at planetary angles. My granddaughter has Pluto square her sun, and she's the one whose father was from Vietnam, and he was 1 year old, a little over 1 year old when we adopted him. When he was 1.5 years old, he woke up in the middle of the night screaming, had nightmares, and it was at the very moment that a plane load of Vietnamese children crashed and everyone was killed. And so I think that was a real traumatic time for him. He didn't go to sleep after that for 8 months. He didn't have his sleep. Right, he would go to sleep, but he'd wake up and he'd never sleep more than 10 minutes at a time. So it's a stressful time for him. So then when his daughter turned, I guess it was like 1.5 years old, then that's when we had our financial crises happen. So it's like, now to talk to my son, everything's his even keel, and he's very responsible, but he has a huge high position in a bank, and he's having a layoff like lots and lots of people, and it's stressful, and he's young, and so it's that Pluto thing, like, what do I have control over, what don't I have control over? And you can see through the generations when things happen, because sometimes it will, like with a Saturn square then, it would mean that perhaps when your father was 3 years old, his something happened to his family and he felt abandoned. So when you're 3 years old, then he feels that again, and so then you feel that, and you don't get the response you need from it. So this isn't to pick on any parent. I mean, I have 2 birth children, 2 adopted children, and I look at their charts and I've set them all down and I've made a disclaimer. Because you can see how you screwed them up, you know, and I said, oh my God, this is how I screwed you up here, this is how I screwed you up there, but that was wrong, and so you've got to learn from that. But it's just
They chose you.
Yeah, they don't want to buy that one bit. They want me to own them. But you know what? My kids don't have the same bad aspects I have. They have other aspects that I created for them, but they don't. The ones that I was aware of, they don't have those. So I broke a cycle thinking.
You created a few new ones.
I created some new ones, but I can help them with that because those are just temporary ones.
So did you know about astrology when you were raising them? Or
Well, I learned about astrology when I was learning about astrology when I adopted my son from Vietnam. And I was supposed to get him, and I told my teacher I was getting him, and she said, well, you're not going to get him until October 3rd. And I said, but we were supposed to have gotten him in August. And she said, yes, but you're not going to get him until Mercury goes direct. And that's the first time I ever heard about Mercury retrograde. And sure enough, October 3rd, we got a phone call, and he said, he's ready. So we waited till Mercury went direct. But it really helped with my children. It helped teaching them. It helped knowing, you know, how to encourage them or where some of their fears were. And I do feel lucky because I have 4 absolutely fabulous kids. And I think astrology really helped that. But with my first child, someone gave me a book on how to raise children at home in your spare time. And it said, really love your children and do everything you can for them to either come out good or bad. That was my backup. So when Saturn makes this angle with the Sun, it means that the person feels that maybe they're not okay. Maybe they don't measure up to their father's expectations, or maybe the father doesn't measure up to them. If it's the moon, maybe the mom is absent, or the mom doesn't live up to their expectations, or you feel like you don't live up to your mom's expectations. But there's something about feeling like you don't measure up. So it's really important to learn how to respect yourself and understand that probably one of your parents is going through a real difficult time, and you just kind of absorb that. And that it's your responsibility, again, Saturn having to do with responsibility, to be the best you can be. And what I found with people with difficult angles to Saturn, with their moon or their sun, they either become low achievers because they feel like they can't measure up, or they become high achievers because they work so hard to try to overcome their feeling of lack, that they have the discipline and they have the fortitude to be able to raise to great heights. And this is also called the president's aspect, because most presidents of corporations and most presidents in the United States have Saturn squares like this, because they've had to overcome, and they have that discipline to do the work to face their fears. But even when you're at the top of the heap, you feel alone. Because if you're the president of a corporation, you can't let somebody know you're scared. Or it's going to scare everybody else. Or the president of the United States can't say, gee, I'm really scared. What do I do? I mean, that would make all of us scared. So they often feel like they have to be by themselves out there taking on a lot of responsibility. But what you learn with one of your tests with Saturn squaring your sun and moon is to know what is your responsibility, what responsibility belongs to other people, and what responsibility you need to get rid of just because it's not yours. And whenever you have a Saturn transit, it's the same thing. Looking over the decisions you make, your responsibility for your decisions, looking over the last 7 years to see what you've done right so you can do more of it, see what you've done wrong so you can correct it but cut your losses, but focus on your successes. So you want to use those Saturn cycles to assess yourself, not to be overcritical of yourself, but to assess yourself. And that's easier said than done, I know, but you just have to remember sometimes that the person that's the hardest on you is yourself when you have that. When you have Saturn make a hard angle with Mercury, it means sometimes you don't listen, or maybe nobody listens to you, and maybe you feel like you don't have a voice, or maybe by transit it's a laryngitis aspect, actually. A lot of people get laryngitis when Saturn makes a hard angle with Mercury. But the idea is to learn how to be a disciplined or organized thinker, because Saturn helps you do that. And it's really important to learn how to hear. One of my friends that is very, very smart, that she has that Saturn square her Mercury, but it ties in her 7th house. She married a man who's deaf, and that's how that happens. But it's about discipline type, and that's definitely a left brain type thinking. Saturn making a hard angle with Venus is about, are you lovable enough? There's a tendency to criticize yourself too much. You look in the mirror and see all your flaws that nobody else is really going to pay attention to. But it's about being responsible in love. But sometimes with Saturn, the problem with Saturn, if you have these fears, there's a tendency for you to withdraw from other people. And a lot of people are shy when they have Saturn making a hard angle with your Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and they hold back, but they might be brilliant, they might be rich, and they might be handsome or beautiful. And when they hold back, other people think they're being a snob, when they're not being a snob at all. So anybody with a Saturn, a hard angle with Saturn, has to learn, even if they're feeling really insecure, to be the first one in, to shake somebody's hand, let them know they're approachable anyway, to say hello, and that breaks the ice, and that makes people be able to relate with you. Yes?
Do these interpretations hold if the planet is in the sign, like all these Saturn things, if this planet was in Capricorn, for example, would some of this possibly apply?
If a person's Sun is in Capricorn?
Well, yeah, like you just talked about Venus and Saturn.
You know, I think...
But would Venus and Capricorn possibly express the same, or is it not?
Well, Venus and Capricorn isn't going to be... Venus and Capricorn could be very practical, but it's not necessarily... you don't have that same self-criticism as Venus squaring Saturn, or the squares of oppositions. The angles with Saturn, the hard angles with Saturn means that there's a fear or a feeling of lack involved. But Venus in Capricorn just means, you know, for somebody, for your wife's birthday, you'll buy her a toaster or something. It's that kind of Saturn in Capricorn practical. But it's but it's, there would be something else that would create a shyness. But usually, like Venus in Capricorn, Venus in the 10th house, you want to respect your partner. It's going to tell what's really important for you in a love situation is to respect her. That has to be the number one priority because of the Capricorn influence. Venus in squaring Saturn sometimes can be a fear of you won't have enough money. So it's really important to have a financial plan for yourself. And that's even when Saturn makes a hard angle with Venus through your transits. You want to be able to know the difference between your necessities and your preferences, put your preferences in a priority order, know exactly what it costs you to live, know how much money you need to make in order to meet those, know where you need to cut, if you need to cut something back. And once you have that, you're able to go forward. When it comes to investments, if you have a hard angle with Saturn and Venus, or Saturn in Taurus, or Saturn in the 2nd house, and you want to speculate, then you should only speculate with money you can afford to lose, because the fear of making a mistake would interfere with your judgment. So if you can afford to lose $5,000, then you use that for your speculative investments. That's how you compensate for these things that would hold you back otherwise. Saturn, Mars. This is a hard angle because Mars is about action, Saturn is fear of action. And Saturn is good if it keeps you from jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. But it's bad if it keeps you from getting into an airplane. So you have to know when to use fear in a positive way and when you need to let it go because it's holding you back. Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn's about fear again. If it's a square, it usually brings out the negative side. Jupiter's about abundance. So these people sometimes feel like everything's wonderful, and then they get disappointed when it's not, or they feel like everything sucks, and then they're grumpy, you know, all the time. They can't look forward for the good things. So there's a kind of a lot of manic depressive people have this aspect. So there's a remedy for this too. There's a story about a king that had this Jupiter-Saturn angle in his chart, and he would be really happy about things and be really upset about things, and he wanted somebody to help him create some type of equilibrium. And whoever did that could marry his beautiful daughter. So nobody could marry his daughter. This guy came and he wrote something on a piece of paper, wrote one sentence and gave it to the king, and the king let him marry his daughter. And the sentence was, "This too shall pass," which says, when it's really bad, it'll pass. So just live it, you know, so what? And when it's really good, take advantage of it because it's going to pass. And so that's how you deal with the Saturn and the Jupiter. And Saturn making a hard angle with the nodes sometimes means that you end up having to help a lot of people, or when you have Saturn making a hard angle with your node through transit, you often have to go to the hospital and see somebody or help somebody with a flat tire, or it's usually that kind of helping. It can be stressful. Another way to find these stress aspects too is through midpoints. So let's say if your sun was had 1 degree of Aries and your moon was at 29 degrees of Aries, and Saturn comes to 15 degrees of Aries, which is right in the middle, then you're going to feel the stress between the ego part of you, the emotional part of you. And not only if it's at 15 degrees of Aries, if it's 15 degrees of any cardinal sign, which would be 15 degrees of Cancer or Libra or Capricorn, you're going to feel that stress between that part. So these midpoints, I think, are really important also, and sometimes when it's not very obvious in a person's chart why certain things are happening. And then the last thing before we wind up is Mars. And Mars is, I'm not going to go over the planets like Mercury and Venus, but from Mars down to Pluto are the ones where you get slammed. Mars is about action. And when Mars makes a hard angle with the sun or the moon, it means that whatever age or it was, your mom or your dad were working against themselves. It's like a person who really wants to be an artist, but they sell real estate instead because they think that can help support their family, but they really want to be an artist. And so there's that conflict about who they are and what they want to do. And so you learned as a child that you can't be who you should be. Now, if it's a hard angle to the sun, it also means that your dad would have had an anger issue. If it's with your mom had an anger issue. And the reason they had an anger issue is because they were doing what they didn't want to do. And so, but they couldn't teach you how not to have an anger issue. So it's really important for anybody that has a Mars square to deal with their anger. And even if they don't know they have it, they need to look at it, and they can see it where they might be angry with somebody else, or they might attract anger to them. So you just need to understand how anger works. The way anger works is the best thing to do is when you're trying to do something and you get blocked, is to negotiate and say immediately, this is what I would like to do. I want to hear what you want to do so we can decide what to do together, or when you're going to do yours and I'll do mine. And you negotiate, you nip it in the bud, and that's it. People with Mars squares in opposition don't usually do that. It's not safe for them to do that, so they hold it inside, and it just It just kind of sits there and it builds up and builds up, and then a little thing happens, and then you overreact to it.
Yeah, and Pluto comes along and blows everything sky high.
Right.
You know.
There you go.
And what if it's a retrograde Mars?
And a retrograde Mars almost always has a father issue, because in order for a retrograde, for Mars to be retrograde, it has to have some type of opposition to the Sun, and it can be frustrating too, because you want to go forward, but you're stepping backwards. It's like doing the moonwalk, I guess. It's really
Michael Jackson.
It's kind of hard. Yeah, maybe we'll have to see if Michael Jackson has Mars retrograde. But it's about these planets retrogrades. They're not going to keep you from doing anything. And a person that's really interesting to study with that is Picasso. I think he had like 5 retrograde planets, and through progressions, when they turned direct, he always changed his style of painting, which I thought was interesting. So, but it just means that sometimes it's hard to get going, or from a past life standpoint, you didn't get a chance to do it last time, so you get to do it this time, or maybe you didn't do it right last time, so you need to do it this time. But it's something that you're going to want to do. But it often happens when you're later in life than earlier. But Mars making an angle with let me tell you the best thing for Mars. When you get angry and there's nothing you can do about it, you need a physical outlet for it, like to go out and jog or work out at a gym or something. But let me show you what my cousin makes. I think this is a riot. Wait a minute, she gave me one today. I'm not even managed to.
Are you selling them? No.
This is called a wacko, and it says frustration has you in its grip. You want to kick and shout. Here's a little wacko friend that you can't live without. Just grasp it firmly by the legs and find a place to slam it. As you crack it, stuffens out, yell, damn it, damn it, damn it. And you just walk this,
That is so great.
and you get it out of the system.
Oh, that's
Thank you. Well, my cousin's sitting right back there.
All right, we're ready.
But isn't that great?
Yeah.
But what happens is once you do this physical thing, you get it out of your system, then it becomes manageable, then you decide what you can do about it. And sometimes it's best to walk away, and sometimes it's best to confront. But you're making a choice. And the best way to deal with things is to take some type of an action, even if you're choosing not to take an action. Your action is a choice to not take an action, but to always be in that position where you're choosing how you're responding to a situation. And Mars making a hard angle with Venus usually shows with Mercury. Usually, I call it the hoof and mouth disease, where you usually say things and think, "Ooh, I shouldn't have said it." So you just have to learn how to be diplomatic. Mars making a hard angle with Venus is kind of a chauvinistic attitude. It's like if I had a boss, my boss would ask me to bring him a cup of coffee, and the person with the Mars squaring or opposition, their boss would tell them to bring him a cup of coffee. Well, then the person with the difficult angle is going to want to spill that coffee in the boss's lap, but then they're going to look like they have a bad attitude. But they were told to do that. So it's important to learn how to choose. The nice thing about getting older is you can choose your friends, you can choose who you want to hang out with. You can think, actually, if you have some good Pluto squares, you can think about what you want and draw it to you. And you don't have to put up with some of the things you might have to put up when you're younger. And you can learn how to be the diplomat. You can learn how to be kind and how to use these talents. And Venus is about beauty and artistic quality too, and negotiation. And Mars is action. So these people can be very, very creative in their actions, or are very good seamstress, for example. They can design clothes and sew because that's the action in the design at the same time. Saturn and Venus are good architects because it has to do with beauty and structure. And then Neptune and Venus are good oil painters because Neptune has to do with oil. So it's really beautiful from an artistic standpoint how to use these planets. Now what I want to do? Art charts. Huh? Astrological art charts. Yeah. I just want to pass them out so you can fool around with them when you go home.
Is your Mercury in Gemini?
It's in Cancer, actually. But it's in the 10th house, but it's stationary retrograde. This is out of a little book I wrote. I didn't have any to bring with me, but this is about taking your chart and looking at your sun, and it says the sun is like be who I am, and Jupiter is to expand. And if the sun makes a good angle with Jupiter, then it says my ability to be who I am is enhanced by my ability to expand. You go over here to the bad aspects, and it says I'll do a different one now. Venus, my love to gain security, my need to love or gain security is frustrated by and Saturn would be fear. But then you go to this page, and it's about taking the opportunity to be where you take the definition that represents a planet, and instead of turning it the bad way, all it is energy. You just direct it into the good way. And so you're able to turn all your bad aspects into really powerful good aspects.
Give me that paper.
Give her that paper.
Yes. Give you some back there to pass out.
Thank you.
We can spread it out there.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, I totally, I'm a friend of astrology, but I'm still learning a lot, but you were talking a lot about the sun being the father and being the mother. And actually, when you adopt children, I was wondering, do you think that's literally like the birth father, or can it also be the surrogate parent in the person's life?
The question was, does the sun always mean the birth father, or can it be a surrogate parent? And it can be both. It can be the birth father, it can be a surrogate father, it can be, like I have the moon square Pluto in my chart. And my mom died. I almost died when I was 1.5. And I have a 1.5 war between the two. And then my mom died when I was 16. And then I had another mom, and she died on my birthday 10 years later. And then I got another mom, and she died. So the way it shows it, and my moon is in the 8th house. And so it shows, you know, those, and they were all controlling. My first mother was controlling, but she was in my favor. My other two mothers weren't. They were controlling in another way, so I got a different dose of it. But it's interesting if you use all of that. And when I adopted my children, I asked my teacher, how do I look at their parents versus me? And you would read them the same way. Wow. So when I'm going through a hard time, my children's birth parents are going through a hard time. When I'm going through a good time, my my adopted children's birth parents are going through a good time. But it's how we choose to deal with what we're going through that has the outcome. Yes.
I'm wondering, I just thought of this, if you or anybody here has done the charts of the births of the octuplets, you might have some interesting aspects.
That would be interesting too.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
I wasn't surprised.
Yeah, I have a good friend who collects all kind of data. If she does, I'll send it to your group and we'll get that for you. Because you can look at twins too, and sometimes you'll see a difference just because of the time they're born. It will make a difference in their ascending signs. Or if somebody were born at the same moment I was born in the same hospital, we would have the same chart, but like I was a music teacher before I was an astrologer, and there's a real conservative side to me and there's a real flaky side, and depending on which we're using, you know, one of us could look like an old school mom and the other could look kind of outrageous, so or somewhere in between, and so it's how you, or one can have a positive attitude, or one can, you know, have one where we're all ticked off about things. So it just depends. That's why I think the attitude has so much to do with our success in our life. So thank you.
Thank you.